going on, everybody? This is Colin.
And I'm Christian.
And we're from Dark Souls Players. We have a Facebook group that is almost at 100 people, and when we get there, Christian is going to be our first admin that joins me in moderating the page. We also have a Patreon page, which is Patreon/Dark Souls Players. We also have a GoFundMe one as well. So if you want to help us make more of these awesome videos, please be sure to make a donation for that and help pay for our audio equipment and all the other things that go into doing these. GoFundMe will give you the opportunity to do one-time donations if you wish. Patreon is where you become a patron of our channel and you can support us on a monthly basis for as little as $1 a month. We also offer a couple exclusive packages for Sunbros that can donate a little more. So this video that we are doing a video on upgrading an Infusion, just a basic starter guide for how to get into this. You can start your upgrading an Infusion by going to Firelink Shrine and running right down the middle through the tunnel to Andre the Blacksmith. He's the one we're going to be dealing with today in this video. So let's get started.
Alright guys, there are 5 things that we need to cover before we get into this. First thing is, armor no longer upgradable. Sorry fellas, no tanks, no hyper damage absorption of any kind with that. Standard weapons can only be infused. Nothing that requires twinkling, nothing that requires scales, just the standard weapons. In order to get the infusions in this game, there are items in the world called coals. There are 4 different coals scattered throughout the Dark Souls world. They're the Farron coal, the Sage's coal, the Giant's coal, and the Profaned coal. Gathering all the coals gives you access to the wide array of infusion options in this game.
So another thing we really want to stress is that you cannot trade any of the upgrade items or coals or anything that's involved in upgrading an Infusion. Now, the confusing part about this is that you can drop them. So normally when you want to trade another player in Dark Souls, you drop a sword or a shield or whatever, and it comes up as a little yellow thing on the ground, and then your friend will hover over it and pick it up. You can drop it, but the phantom that's in your world can't see it. So if you're wondering, how come I can drop them? You said you can't trade them. It's that that person can't see it to pick it up. That's why you can't trade them. And we're very glad that From Software made that decision, because that would be horrible if people could drop trade all this stuff to each other and buff everybody's weapons up. Fortunately, there's also other safeguards that are put into play, though, so that you can't be too OP in PvP. Last tip before we get into it is that all of what we're talking about today, what me and Christian are sharing with you, is all based on your build. So when you go into your character and you're leveling up and you look at the different stats that you have, your strength, your dex, your intelligence, your faith, those are the big talking about here. Whatever values those are going to affect the benefits of all these different weapons. So it is entirely dependent on how you've built your character. So everybody loves to ask the question, what's the best weapon? That is impossible to answer because not everybody levels up their character the same way. So some of us might be using weapons better than others because of the way that we've built our characters. So realize that what might be good for you may not be good for someone else. Now, Christian mentioned that you can only infuse standard weapons, and that's true. But what I want to do is introduce you to just the 3 major terms when we talk about upgrading your weapons. There are 3 types of weapons when you go to reinforce your weapon. There are standard weapons, like for example on screen here I have the Brigand Twin Daggers. These are weapons that you can find pretty commonly in the game. They're upgraded with Titanite shards first, and then once they get to a certain point you use large Titanite shards, then Titanite chunks, and then finally a Titanite slab to bring it to +10. So you will bring this all the way to +9 before you'll need the mighty Titanite slab to bring it into +10. The second type of weapon is what Christian and I call a unique weapon. This is something like I have on screen, the Hazel Pick. The Hazel Pick requires Twinkling Titanite to upgrade. And there are other items that are like that in the game. There are items that are a bit rarer to find, but aren't boss weapons. These ones you use Twinkling Titanite for all the way up until the end when you use a slab again to finish it off. These, however, only go to +4 with Twinkling Titanite and then finally +5 with a slab. So less amount of steps to get to the max there. And then the final category of weapons that you upgrade are what we call boss weapons. These are weapons like the Dancer's Enchanted Swords, for example, that you can see up here on screen require Titanite scales to use. Titanite scales will bring you all the way to +4 again, and then finally +5 with a Titanite slab. So standard, unique, and boss weapons, all three categories require a Titanite slab to finish off. Now, all the upgrading items in the game can be found and farmed except Titanite slabs. Titanite slabs you can find only 8 per game run through. You can feel free to look up online where all those locations are or find them for yourself. But we just want to mention quickly that there are only 8 because when you make a decision about upgrading a weapon and bringing it to the max, you have only 8 opportunities to do so. Now, you can also upgrade not only weapons, you can upgrade bows, you can upgrade catalysts, which includes staffs, talismans, chimes, and the like, and you can upgrade some shields. But again, you only have 8 opportunities in each playthrough, so choose carefully which ones you're going to bring to the end. Now, be assured here that with 8 opportunities, you still have some opportunities to say, oh, you know what, I didn't want to make that one a slab. You still have a couple more that you can use. So don't sweat it if the first couple ones that you slab are less than perfect of what you're looking for. You still have a few more opportunities to do. But also realize that not everything that's in this game is worth slabbing to the end, and here's why. The big 2 things that are not always worth bringing to a slab point are the catalysts and the shields. The catalyst is because when you upgrade, you are affecting a couple of things with catalyst. You are affecting the physical damage, you're affecting what's called the spell buff, and you're also affecting the scaling. And Christian's going to talk to you about scaling a bit with that as well. Here's the thing. When you upgrade some of the talismans, for example, you can bring their scaling up. So for example, I'm looking here at the white hair talisman. If you see, by putting 1 twinkling titanite in and bringing it to white hair talisman +1, I can raise the faith scaling from D to C by doing that. So it's worth upgrading, but you'll notice that once you get to a certain point, like here I have the priest chime +7 in my inventory, it's not going to go past A. It will get to be slightly better because you can see that it's still a blue A, so it will get slightly better. But you can see here that my spell buff will not be improved if I upgrade to +8. The only thing that's really happening here is my physical damage will go up. So it's not really worth taking that and using one of your precious slabs to bring that to the end because you won't really get a great benefit from it. Unlike weapons, which always get stronger each time you go in. So here, looking at the Black Knight sword +4, by slabbing that up to +5, I'm still getting more damage from that. So that's definitely worth using slabs for weapons, not as much so for any of the catalysts. Same is true for the shields. Both the shields and the catalysts, the physical damage really doesn't mean much. You're not generally hitting people with these things. You're using them to do damage elsewhere. So like with a staff, your damage is going to be from your spells, not from hitting people with your staff. And from your shields, it's the same thing. Very rarely do people actually attack with shields. That was kind of a popular thing in Dark Souls 2, where you had some of those enemies that you would fight in PvE that would have 2 great shields that they would use as weapons. But really, you're not going to use shields much offensively. You're more concerned with the stability on the shields and getting that stability up as high as you can. Some of the shields you cannot bring with a Titanite slab into a higher stability realm. Eventually it'll stop. So watch that carefully and see if it's actually worth bringing a shield to +10, because sometimes it isn't.
Alright guys, so one thing I wanted to touch on real quick was scaling. Scaling is a really important factor in this game. You know, you can increase or decrease your scaling based on your upgrades or your infusions, and that's going to play a big part into whatever build that you have, whatever item that you're infusing or upgrading. First thing you'll notice is the different attribute bonuses located near the bottom. These attributes are strength, dexterity, intelligence, and faith from left to right. All of these have very different abilities and effects. You'll notice different letters such as on the cleric candlestick. There's D, D, and C. Well, what do these letters mean? There's a leveling system, if you will, that goes from E to A. Each letter has a little ladder in each one. There's different grades within that letter. So you can have a D that might be stronger than another D or weaker than another D. All of those are going to affect the scaling for that weapon, and obviously each one will scale better or worse based on the stats that you have, and that's helping you build your character and the effect that it has on the item. The scaling can be found to the right of whatever base damage is that you're looking at. For example, the physical damage on this. To the right, there's a plus sign, and then there's an additional damage. That's the scaling that's added to that. Now, you'll notice on this weapon in particular, it's a perfect example for attribute bonuses and attribute requirement differences. Different items will have maybe a requirement, such as faith. There's a requirement for faith, but you'll notice that it doesn't scale with faith. There's also, it can be the reverse, where there's no requirement for intelligence, but it scales moderately well with intelligence on this item.
Now, one thing I do want to point out quickly is that Christian mentioned scaling goes from A to E, and that's true for almost all of the weapons. But there are a couple of items in the game, such as the Fume Ultra Greatsword, that has an S scaling, which is higher than A, but this is very rare. Alright, now last but not least, it's time to talk about Infusion, the thing that people don't understand the most out of everything that we talk about when it comes to upgrading an Infusion. So there are 15 total different Infusions that you can get, and as Christian mentioned already, you need to have the 4 coals to be able to access all 15. Christian and I are going to take turns talking about what some of these do, the advantages and disadvantages of them. So I'm at the end of the game in this character, so you'll be able to see all 15 up here on screen. You can see also that you need the corresponding gem to use it. So I'm going to talk to you guys first about the first 4, heavy, sharp, refined, and raw. So let's talk about heavy first. Heavy is, very simply put, it is the strength infusion. It takes your strength scaling bonus up 1 letter grade, and it strips the dexterity off. The next one is sharp, and that's basically the opposite of heavy, except it doesn't actually strip the strength, it only reduces the strength. So sharp is slightly different from heavy in that regard. So it raises that dex up, brings the strength down 1 letter grade. Refined is the balanced approach. Refined brings both strength and dexterity up 1 letter grade. Now, you might ask yourself, why not just do that instead of use the other 2? Well, if you notice with sharp and if you notice with heavy, sometimes the bonuses will go up maybe even 1 more letter grade depending on the different weapon you're using. And you might notice that the damage too, as you're looking at that physical number, you'll notice that, for example, with these Brigand Twin Daggers, if I heavy them, I go to 65 plus 29 with the way that my current build is, whereas if I go to refined, I'm at 60 plus 37. So they're different figures, even though the actual attribute bonus may be the same letter. So make sure you're looking at those numbers too when you're deciding between those. Raw is one that completely takes off all the attribute bonuses and just pumps up that base damage. So it removes scaling entirely. This one's not very common, but it is an option to you.
Okay, so the next 2 pairs that I want to talk about are the Crystal Gem and the Simple Gem, and the Fire Gem and the Chaos Gem. The Crystal Gem and the Simple Gem kind of go together. They both add magic damage. Now with the Crystal, it adds magic damage, and it also adds an intelligence scaling. But as a trade-off, it reduces the strength and the dexterity. With the Simple Gem, you'll notice that it gives a reduced magic damage buff that also has some scaling to it. But as a trade-off, you get the ability to restore your focus power gradually. That's a nice addition. With the Fire Gem, it strips the scaling completely, and it just adds some raw fire-based damage. In comparison with the Chaos Gem, it adds a reduced fire-based damage, but it also adds the ability to scale with the fire damage. Now in trade, this reduces your strength and dexterity, but it also adds an intelligence and faith scaling ability.
So lightning is next. Lightning obviously adds lightning damage. It reduces strength and dexterity bonuses, but it adds a faith bonus, and the more faith that you have, your lightning damage will increase. Blessed is very much similar to the simple gem in that it also adds a hidden ability kind of in the background. Blessed, it adds faith scaling as well, very similar to the lightning, but it also adds a hidden ability to recover HP over time. So the simple gem lets you recover FP or focus power, or some might know it as mana or magic power. That blue bar, that will recover over time with that. Your red bar, your HP, recovers with blessed items. And then we have Deep and Dark, and Deep and Dark are very similar to Fire and Chaos in the comparison between the two. Except in this case, instead of talking about fire, we're talking about dark damage. So for the Deep gem, it has a strip scaling effect to it, but it adds base dark damage, whereas with the Dark gem, you have a scaled dark damage that's added onto that because you have a reduced strength and dex, but you have an addition of an intelligence and a faith scaling on that, so you can increase your dark damage as those stats rise.
Alright guys, so for our last three, we have the Blood Gem, the Poison Gem, and the Hollow Gem. The Blood Gem and the Poison Gem are very similar to each other. They add an auxiliary effect, but as a trade-off, they reduce the base damage. For the Blood Gem especially, you can use the Blood Gem on an already, like a weapon or an item that has bleeding damage already onto it. It only adds like maybe 4 to the auxiliary component, so use that as you wish. Lastly, the Hollow Gem. This makes it so that your weapon has a reduced base damage, but it also scales with luck, which is a really interesting component for those of you who want to increase the luck stat and utilize that to your benefit for whatever the case. So they have a unique set of items such as Henri's gear that uses luck to your advantage. I've also noticed that with the Hollow Gem, any item that's infused with it, it also boosts your luck stat. I have a sword that's +7 with the Hollow Gem in it, and it gives me like 4 luck. So that's an interesting component if you're looking for a few extra points there. So we've made it through all 15 gems, and you finally have infused one, and you were liking it at first, but you know what, as you made your character, you started to hate it, and you just want to go back to the original weapon you had. Guess what? We have something called the Shriving Stone. This thing's sweet. So if you really hate your life, you want to destroy yourself in a pit of lava because you want your weapon back, there's an option. Shriving Stone actually reverses your weapon infusion. Now, it's in the infusion section, so you would go to infuse it like you would normally with any of the other gems. And if you select that option, you can infuse it with the Shriving Stone and it turns it back to normal. It does consume a Shriving Stone, and unfortunately it does not return whatever gem it was that you used. Like if you had a simple gem or a heavy gem and you use you infuse it with the Shriving Stone, it won't give you that back, add it back into your inventory, but you will have the item returned to normal. Just a little side note, that's a good benefit to you. Don't be afraid to upgrade or reinforce a weapon or any item, because the infusion is completely separate, so that does not affect any of the reinforcement whatsoever. So after the Shriving Stone, if you have a straight sword that's +8, +10, whatever, and it was heavy, use a Shriving Stone on it, you reverse it, it's still a +10.
Which is much different from Dark Souls 1, because man, I remember that if you were upgrading a weapon, you had to stop at a certain point, and then you could turn it into Divine or whatever, and if you were to reverse it, you'd lose like all that progress. Dark Souls 3 has simplified it so much, because it's basically just whatever you're going to put on it, it just adds that word in front of whatever you already had. So if you have, like Christian said, if you have like a Zweihander +8 and you add fire to it, it just becomes fire Zweihander +8. And the same if you were going the other direction and put a Shriving Stone on it. So you know that part of who we are at Dark Souls players, that we're all about no nonsense. We like just presenting you with all the information so you can make informed choices of how to play Dark Souls and have a better time at the game. But we have to have a bit of discussion at the end of this video, because inevitably the question that comes out of all of this is, what do you recommend? What's the best? And we get all kinds of requests from this and personal messages from you guys, and we appreciate it. But we would just want to offer you some thoughts so you can rewatch this video and talk through a little bit what you think is better and use up maybe some of our suggestions too. So, Christian, what do you recommend for some people to use with these infusions?
All right, guys. Well, I love just grabbing the heaviest friggin' thing I can and crushing the life out of whatever it is. So, some of my favorite weapons to do that, to destroy my opponent's soul, Fume Ultra Greatsword is awesome. I don't know why I said the Fume Ultra Greatsword, because it's not heavy infusion.
It's just really fun to use.
It's just a cool weapon.
The Cathedral Greatsword, though, that's one you can infuse, and that one's pretty big too. That's a crowd favorite with the infusions.
That has some solid reach, and that's good for, like, I think that's really good for enemies and PvP as well. Personally, I use the heavy great axe plus 10 for as long as I could, because it has so much damage. You can buff it. Like with my stats right now, I'm looking at 616 total damage, and you can buff it. You can buff yourself. You can really bring that up to a high amount. It has the problem is with PvP, it's way better for PvE because its reach sucks. But it's really strong.
But chances are, when you're using those kind of big weapons, you need to have a lot of strength to even use them anyway. So it makes total sense that you'd put heavy on it, because you've already got a ton of points in strength. So why would you buff the dex on it with a sharp gem or something like that? Why not use heavy? It's funny, though, that you mentioned that, because I've had a couple of items where I've had a heavy not be as good as the refined. I don't know why, but sometimes putting the refined on, I don't know, maybe it's because of the requirements or whatever that's on the weapon. Sometimes the refined will edge it out a little bit. Like, I know with the Astora Greatsword, the refined is actually better than heavy on it for some reason, at least with my build. I don't get why. You'd think your heavy would always beat out refined with just raw power, but maybe it's just because the grade scaling is a bit lower on that.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that it's their job on the refined is really good, because if you like to stay a balanced player, like, you don't want to raise either stat too high. Like, if my strength, I had 50 strength and I had maybe like 10 dexterity or whatever, so there was a lot of items that I couldn't use because I just didn't have the dexterity for it. But if I've noticed on other characters that I've had, where it's like, if it's an even number, it scales pretty nicely. Even though you have lower numbers, you still have access to a wide option of weapons and various gear that you can wear, without having to dump all of your points into one specific category.
Yeah,
it's a nice trade-off.
That climb to strength 50 for that Fume Greatsword is brutal. That's a long
have to
thing.
change your diaper.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a lot of like the lighter weapons, they seem to have a much lower strength requirement, but like a pretty decently high dex requirement. So it seems like sharp or refined is definitely the way to go if you're using like one-handed weapons, and you don't care about like bleed and stuff like that. It's funny too, because while we were putting all this together, Christian and I were looking up some things online about some recommendations that people give and what the different bosses are weak to in this game, and we noticed that like none of the elements really work well on a lot of these bosses. They're at least not enough to merit having that like weapon for the whole game. Lightning seems to be one that like several bosses are weak against, but not everything's weak to lightning, and some things are actually, like the hardest boss in the game, the Nameless King, he's resistant to it. So, I don't know, can you think of any examples, Christian, where an elemental one like fire or lightning might be beneficial? Maybe like PvP, I don't know.
Yeah, lightning and magic seem to be that and fire. I think fire has been really good.
Yeah, I guess
I love fire.
Yeah, fire seems to be really common. It seems like everybody's wielding some sort of fire thing when you're doing PvP. Either they're putting that resin on, or they all just have fire weapons. Because I seem to be like, every time I'm taking a hit, there's some flames coming off my body when that happens.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think the top three I'd list is magic, the fire, and lightning. and they're pretty good for any boss, any PvP scenario. Those are pretty solid ones to lean on.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like, I'm looking at the list of these infusions again, and I don't even think Raw is really used that much. I think Dark Souls 1, there might have been some times where Raw was nice, but do you think that that even has any merit in Dark Souls 3?
I don't know. I mean, unless the only situation I could see it is if you used raw to get some damage, but only as like a supplementary, like physical weapon. Like if you're maybe a sorcerer or something like that, if you wanted to go with that, um, like as an offhand weapon.
Oh, that's true. I
And
could see that. Like if you're not going to pump a lot into strength or dex, put some raw in there. Like if you're going to be a pure pyromancer or a pure mage or something like that.
never pure, always tainted with lust and evil.
Dark and deep both seem to be pretty uncommon too. I don't think I've seen anybody using actual dark stuff. I know the dark sword is a popular item in this game, but I haven't really seen a lot of people that use deep or dark. Have you?
Not really, not too often. Definitely
Blessed.
not too often.
Same thing with blessed. I feel like you don't really need to bless a weapon in this game because you can get a miracle that you can bless the weapon with. So why infuse it with blessed if you can just buff it with blessed? I think that's my problem with
Yeah.
fire and lightning too. I don't see why you would put it on by default when you can just resin it on and have another effect on top of that.
Yeah. The hard thing is too, I think that the buffs are probably better during PvE than PvP. Especially if you're in, guys, Dark Souls 3, full of worlds that you invade, and it is 3-on-1 all day long, and
Oh
you get
God,
destroyed. I get
PvP
destroyed
really
every day.
sucks sometimes in Dark Souls 3. A lot of people want that arena. Maybe it'll come in a DLC.
It's so much fun, but it turns your soul black by the end of it if you're not good.
Speaking of PvP, I think we need to point out too, Christian, that bleed is like exclusively for PvP. It really doesn't work on really any of the bosses. I think one or two are susceptible to it, but most of them are resistant to it. It's almost entirely useful for PvP. Like some people try to bleed people out with that.
Oh yeah, if you're going for PvP, I think the biggest one I've seen is the Warden Twin Blades, for like dual wield Warden Twin Blades, and they uh, they infuse them with a blood gem, and people just destroy with that.
The last thing I can think of is like I noticed that with hollow gems, I've noticed that like it seems to be a pretty popular topic on YouTube lately. It seems to be that a lot of people are claiming that hollow is like OP, that like a lot of people have been like really leveling up the luck stat on their character and making their hollow weapons really strong. And supposedly there's claims that it's super OP. Some people say it's overrated. Some people say it isn't. I don't know. Have you seen anything about that, Christian?
I've definitely read about that as well. Yeah, where they say that yeah the luck stat was it? I was reading a debate between the Sunlight Straight Sword and I think it was Henri's. Is it Henri's Straight Sword? Levels with luck?
Probably because she's, the
Yeah,
person that's
yeah, yeah,
tied to the
yeah,
Hollow Lord ending. So,
yeah. It's Henri's Straight Sword. Yeah, and people were saying that Henri's Straight Sword was potentially the strongest one because like with the Sunlight Straight Sword you can buff it with the Oath of Sunlight and stuff like that, and then you can still add all your other crap. Um, but I guess with Henri's it's just like a raw damage that I don't know. I haven't seen anybody using it, but I've read the same thing.
yeah. So, if you guys are still watching this, and hopefully you've watched this video to the end, it sounds like from our recommendations that we really recommend if you're going to build like a tank character, go the heavy route. If you're going to use one-handed weapons and specialize in those, go for sharp or refined. Otherwise, feel free to kind of dabble around in the other ones. It also depends on if you're going to do PvP or PvE. If you're going to do PvE, then you can kind of have fun with really anything if you're not going to focus a whole lot on PvP. But if you're going to be a big PvP player, you're probably going to want to actually choose like fire or lightning or something like that because now you're not worried about what bosses are weak against it. You're worried about does the player have gear that is resistant to this element, and most likely they don't because as Christian pointed out earlier, none of the armor can be upgraded in Dark Souls 3, so everybody is weak to pretty much everything, and there's subtle nuances in the gear here and there, but you're really not getting past like 30 or 40, I think. I don't even think I've seen 40 resistance on a lot of these things. But yeah, so hopefully you guys have learned more about upgrading and Infusion. There's obviously lots more we could talk about, but we wanted to give you a video to kind of help set you on your way with this. Feel free to like this video, subscribe to our channel. If we get enough subscribers, we can rename our page to actually call it the Dark Souls Players YouTube page. It's already the channel name, but we would like to have that nicer URL to point people to. Be sure to join the conversation on Facebook or comment here on YouTube. We'd be happy to learn from your insights too and start up a discussion on that. Thanks for watching, everybody.